Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. Robert Jenrick has resigned as Immigration Minister just hours after the government's emergency Rwanda legislation was published. He says it doesn't go far enough and stronger protections were needed to end the merry-go-round of legal challenges. The news was first broken to Andrew Marr here on LBC by his Home Office colleague Laura Farris.
Straightforward question. I am told that Robert Jenrick has resigned. Has he?
I understand that he has.
He has resigned.
Families whose loved ones died in the pandemic have told LBC Boris Johnson's apology doesn't mean anything. The former Prime Minister said sorry at the COVID inquiry for the suffering caused. He's also said the government probably should have cancelled mass gatherings in March 2020. Police in East London are looking into whether a triple shooting last night was gang-related. A murder inquiry is underway after a woman died and 2 others were injured in Hackney. And campaigners have told us they feel let down after the government's decision not to bring in a Hillsborough law. Instead, MPs will introduce a charter to encourage people to be open and honest in official investigations. 97 Liverpool fans died in the Hillsborough disaster at an FA Cup match in 1989. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 41 points at 75.30. The pound buys $1.25 and €1.16. LBC weather, showers moving to the northeast overnight with a low of -2. Rain for many tomorrow morning, but feeling brighter with a high of 12. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's Wednesday's Cross Question on LBC. We have a very talkative panel tonight. They're already talking while I'm doing my introduction. Let me introduce them to you. We have on my immediate left Steve Reid, Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Labour MP for Croydon North. Steve, you have been omnipresent on the media over the past days.
I have.
You're obviously in with the leadership, so that's always a good place to be.
I think I get a Christmas break sooner, so
Robert Courts is with us. He's Conservative MP for Witney and West Oxfordshire. He chairs the Commons Defence Select Committee. Welcome to you, Robert. To my right, Afua Hagan, who is broadcaster and journalist. Welcome back. Long time no see. And Geoff Norcott, comedian, who is the host of the What Most People Think podcast, which is truly excellent, especially this week because I'm his guest on it.
You're a fantastic babe.
Welcome to you, babe. I've never called that by anybody.
I don't know what happened there.
Right, we have a lot to talk about tonight, and you can tell we've got a lot to talk about because we've only got one space left on the switchboard at the moment. If you want to fill it, 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850 and you can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, as well as watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first caller. It's Stephen in East Grinstead. Stephen, hi, what would you like to ask?
Hi, good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. Are we seeing the Conservative Party self-imploding before our very eyes?
Nice, short, pithy question. Robert Courts, credit to you for not cancelling tonight, because you could have easily done that. I know appearing on a programme like this on a night like this is not the easiest gig in town, but I think a lot of people are going to see this as yet another sign that the Conservative Party is imploding, as Stephen alleges.
Yeah, I mean, it won't surprise you. I don't agree with that, but I can tell you why, which is simply that we are dealing with circumstances that are really, really difficult. You know, we're dealing with a big existential issue that really matters to the whole of the public, and they expect us to deliver on it, and we've got to deliver on it. There's no two ways about that. But there's a big, complicated, interlocking mesh of international law and international obligations, and then domestic law as well, with different sections of the public wanting different things. This is really difficult stuff that we are dealing with. So it's not surprising that any government of any party in at any time when dealing with issues like this would be having some choppy waters.
Well, that is probably true, but they are choppy waters that you've almost deliberately chosen, because I can't believe that James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, didn't know of Robert Jenrick's sort of reservations about this legislation before he stood up in the Commons at 6 o'clock and made his statement. He must have known that Robert Jenrick was about to resign, so why even do it?
Well, you'd have to ask them that. I mean, this is a story that, of course, is emerging as we're speaking. I mean, clearly Robert has some concerns about whether this is effective on the look of what we've seen from his resignation. Well, we're going to have to look at it, and we're going to have to make it effective, because it needs to be something that is legally compliant. It needs to be something that delivers on what people are expecting us to do. That's the purpose of legislation. It's the purpose of Parliament.
But this is also, I think, a big political event where you have Robert Jenrick, who, I mean, I don't know whether you'd agree with this, but I've always seen him as on the sort of moderate left of the party rather than on the Suella Braverman right of the party. And yet he agrees with her that the government haven't gone far enough. So this is not something that you can say, well, it's just the usual suspects on the right that are creating havoc here. He's not one of them.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. He's a very bright guy. He's a very decent man. He's a loss. No two ways about it. And it's a shame that he's felt he's had to take this step. But it does, the point you're making is a good one, because it does go to this point that this is something that the public really care about. I mean, it is something that no matter where you sit, people do see that, particularly with illegal immigration, this is something that just goes against that British sense of fairness, that people should play by the rules, that people should...
But surely the government should play by the rules as well, because remember that famous phrase from Brandon Lewis? Well, yes, we are breaking the law, but in a limited and specific way. This isn't even limited and specific. Well, it is specific. But they are breaking international law. They're going against the terms of the European Convention on Human Rights. And what does it say to the rest of the world? That yet again, a Conservative government in this country is happy to break the international law.
Well, look, this is a really interesting and good point, and there's no sort of quick answer to this. I mean, the first point to make is that Parliament is sovereign in this country, and Parliament, people elect us to make the laws under which they're governed. They hold us to account, and rightly so. So we have to be able to take the steps and make the law as accordingly. The thing that's changed that over the course of the last few decades is that we've signed up to a number of international obligations. And although those obligations are all very well intentioned, and in many cases do exactly what they're intended to do, equally in some cases they start to get out of date. And migration is a classic example of how this is the case.
But you're right.
If I just finish the point, though, because that international law also needs amending, but it's amended very, very slowly. Now, the reason why this is so important is that, what people really find that puts them off about politicians is when they say they're going to do one thing and they're going to say, and then they end up doing another. And I'm not making excuses here. I'm simply trying to explain how tricky this is. That in many cases, you are politicians, elected politicians of whatever party, are bound and tied by obligations that sit outside Parliament. We're going to have to deal with this and understand how we deal with that as a country.
Well, surely how you deal with it is
what they've asked for.
You say to the electorate, these international conventions are out of date, so therefore we're going to use our diplomatic powers to persuade our allies and colleagues around the world to change them. Now, on
the answer to that, I mean, I agree with that principle, that basic principle, I agree. I mean, that's clearly absolutely right, and we should be doing that, but it's slow.
Well, it may be slow, but there are plenty of other countries that are experiencing similar problems to ourselves on this, so it shouldn't be impossible to get some sort of international
to be fair
agreement.
To the government, I think you are seeing movement on that already, because you've seen the Prime Minister who's been spoken to allies and friends all around the world, many of whom are having exactly the same issues, and you're seeing this in Europe now. You're seeing this in places like Italy. You're seeing this with other countries like Greece as well, some of which have started to, that shape of that change of that international agreement is starting to take shape. But nonetheless, people expect us to do this now. And one of the comments you'll get from people all the time is, why don't you just do it? Why don't you just stop the votes?
But your job as a politician surely is to lead public opinion, not follow it. And the problem here is, I think that most people, or a lot of people, see the government pandering to parts of the electorate that are obsessed with immigration to the exclusion of everything else.
So there's two parts to this, and it's a balance, isn't it? So, are we leaders? Of course we are. Are we there to explain the importance of things? Yes, but we're also there to serve our constituents. And I don't think when your constituents are very clear about something, that's just pandering to them. And I think also, when you say sectors of the electorate, I mean, I just think that there are many people out there who just feel that this goes to an issue of fairness on illegal immigration.
Okay.
That people should play by the rules, that it's not fair to have an uncontrolled immigration system. That's the point. It's not about being obsessed by immigration per se. It's about playing by the rules and fairness, and that's what really offends people.
Steve Reed, you've done very well not to interrupt at all over the past few minutes, which is very unlikely.
I thought he was doing a really brave job there, but the fact is, it's covering up absolute chaos. This is a government in free fall. We just had the immigration minister resign in protest at his own government's immigration policy. And as I sit here and speak now, I don't know whether he's gone because he thinks the policy's too crazy or not crazy enough. And the only way that we're going to put the Tories out of their misery, and it may come to this out of this issue, is to get a general election early, because Robert Jenrick and others in the government are positioning themselves for where they think they want to be if the Tories end up in opposition. They're looking at the likes of Suella Braverman and the hard right of the Tory party.
Is that fair on Robert Jenrick? Because he is not one of the headbangers, is he? I mean, even you would have to admit that.
Look, he's not one of the headbangers. There are worse in there, but he was put in there as a counterweight to Suella Braverman.
Nor is Robert, by the way.
I know
I think we can agree.
I like Robert. He was put in there as a counterbalance to Suella Braverman, but he's gone the full Suella. He's ended up being pulled right by her rather than moderating her opinions. And you've got a government now that, I mean, Rwanda's a gimmick. It's not really a policy. It was designed to grab the headlines when Boris Johnson was having a particularly bad spat over one scandal or another, and they've somehow elevated that up into a pseudo policy, but it's completely undeliverable. They spent £140 million of your listeners and viewers' money sending not a single migrant to Rwanda, but they've sent 3 Home Secretaries over there. Now they've come back with a deal that they're trumpeting as the solution to all of our problems, that at maximum will involve sending 100 asylum seekers over there. But here's the rub we weren't expecting. We will be taking asylum seekers from Rwanda into our country, so we may end up with more asylum seekers coming here than we'll be going there. But they've just signed an agreement to bring more people. I imagine most of the people that were looking to Rwanda and thinking, oh, the Tories are going to deal with the small boats crisis with this policy, were not expecting that we could potentially be taking more asylum seekers from Rwanda than would be being sent to Rwanda from here. Now, I do agree with Robert, but the public are looking for answers on this. They want answers, not gimmicks. Governing is hard, Robert. You can't make that an excuse out of that. This is a thorny problem, but they elect governments to deal with them, not to try and grab headlines.
Well, I think, to be fair to me, and that was the point I was making, is that this is a thorny problem, and that it
is a thorny problem. It is a thorny problem, but the way...
Afua Hagan, let's come to you. You're not a politician.
No, thank God.
You're a commentator, but what do you make of the events of the last few hours?
I mean, I absolutely agree with you that what we are seeing is people positioning the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's like rats from a sinking ship, and they are just positioning themselves for when the government is in opposition. I absolutely feel that this is about Robert Jenrick. Before he was quite supportive of Rishi Sunak, and yes, he was seen as a moderate in the party that was full of people that were leaning so very much to the right side of the right. And he was seen as a moderate and someone who could probably bring balance. He absolutely has not gone that way, because now he's trying to see what his future is. Where is my position going to be in this party that is going to lose the next election? Because this Rwanda policy is a non-policy. It's not going to work. It's absolutely not going to work. And so what we've seen here this evening is a government in chaos, because the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. Whether he's resigned or not, people are not entirely sure. He's
issued a letter.
Yes, but why would James Cleverly be up there at a press conference even though he resigned this afternoon and not knowing what to say or not? That is a sign of a government in absolute chaos. So what we are seeing now is people positioning themselves, deciding what mast to nail their colours to, and doing that at the behest of actually getting behind or creating decent policy around migration, illegal or legal, around the numbers of immigration. I mean, no matter what side of the political divide you're on, nobody wants to see people in small boats in harm's way. Nobody wants to see that. And of course, we know that we have huge infrastructure challenges because of the high numbers of legal migration. And we know that that's something that we need to do something about as well. So what we need is actual genuine policies that are going to hold water, which we don't have.
Unfortunate pun there, holding water with the small boats, but we'll let you off that one.
That's why I'm not a politician.
Geoff Norcott, you're a sort of moderate right-winger. I think you describe yourself as that.
I've voted Conservative in the last few elections, but yeah, it's chaos at the moment. And I think a week is a long time in politics. I mean, who would have thought that Suella would get knocked off headline spot by Robert Jenrick? Of all people, he's the big dog in town tonight. I mean, there was a part of James Cleverly when I saw him stand up tonight I thought he must have been thinking, I was on planes a little while ago. I was flying all around the world. I was meeting world leaders. And by all accounts, doing a pretty good job. And then suddenly, he's in the mix of something which I think is unsolvable. And it's kind of symptomatic of the Tory melee of the last 18 months in particular, is that if they'd handled the comms well enough, there is actually a better story to tell, is that small boat crossings are down. Some of the returns agreements that have been negotiated are not that bad. But they've got behind this Rwanda policy, which is just so wrong-headed. And
which even the Home Secretary described a few weeks ago as batshit crazy.
I mean, he's not daft, but he's in that job, and they've gone so far down this road. And I think that even if Rwanda was to work, this is the point, even if it was to work in exactly the way that they say it's supposed to work, it wouldn't take that many people, where these are trifling numbers. And it would seem that with the announcement today, that if somebody goes to Rwanda and commits a crime, they could then be deported back to the UK, which could be seen in some quarters as a way of getting back to the UK by committing
an incentive to commit a crime.
It could be seen that way. I think it's madness, but they're now so far down the road of this madness, I don't think they know where to stop.
And Robert, that's a fair point, isn't it? I mean, you put a clause in the treaty, and the Rwandans have done this, saying anybody that gets a prison sentence of more than 5 years will send back to the UK. That's an incentive for asylum seekers in Rwanda to commit serious crimes.
Well, I mean, presumably that was part of the negotiation that the Rwandan government insisted upon. I mean, I slightly disagree with Geoff on the fact that, I do think what you've got to do... Rwanda, I agree with them in the sense that it's not on its own going to solve the entire issue, because it won't take everybody, it won't take all those numbers. But I do think
it's almost none of them.
No. I mean, I follow it doesn't solve the thing in its entirety. But where I just slightly gently push back is the fact that I think you do have to break the business model of the people trafficking gangs. You've got to say that if you come here illegally by following a people trafficking gang, that you won't stay in the UK.
But you don't do that by a gimmick, do you? I mean, we both agree with the problem, but you can't resolve it by a gimmick like Rwanda. What about setting up a cross-border police force with, countries in Europe and beyond, so that we can all put resources into tackling the people traffickers at source?
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually disagree with that.
That's
principle.
An actual policy that might deliver an outcome.
I don't disagree with that, and in fact, I think government, to be fair to them, is doing that. I mean, that's why you're seeing these bilateral agreements with the French, with more money going in and cooperation going on with the French.
You're not on that, no, because they're still a bit daggers drawn with the former EU countries, because they've created this fractious relationship that means they can't form the partnership that is required to tackle this problem. What about the, there are hotels in my constituency, as there are all over the country, that are full of asylum seekers living wretched lives. It's got to be said, because they've been locked in there for 2 or 3 years now, but it's costing the taxpayer £8 million a day to put those people in there. Why do we not use that money to fund more people in the Home Office to process applications, deal with them faster, and then remove those?
They're
not. There's not £3 billion a year.
They have hired more people.
So they are getting through this.
I'll tell you what they said they would do. So they would close a certain number of these asylum hotels. They removed the asylum seekers from them, and they put them in other hotels. It's all cloak and daggers, smoke and mirrors.
But they're not actually demonstrate a point in a way, is that yes, there has been progress made. They are doing faster applications. There are less boats crossing, but fewer boats. Sorry, I used to be an English teacher. Terrifying for everybody listening as well. But they can't tell that story, can they? Because they've kept banging this Rwanda thing. That if you look at the polling, the British public are broadly approve of the idea of some kind of deterrent, but the British public are smart enough to realise this isn't going to happen. You know what it feels like? It feels like a football team that are 4-0 down in the corner, trying to keep hold of the ball, and you're like, but lads, you're 4-0 down. You're not 4-0 up. You can't run out the clock when you're 4-0 down. That's not how it works.
That's enough about AFC Wimbledon, isn't it?
Oh, we won 5-0 on Monday.
You did. I saw, against a team for the 7th tier, I think, of the league.
True story.
Right, we'll take more questions in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC
a month.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
21 minutes past 8. Steve Reid is with us, Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. He's Labour MP for Croydon North. Robert Courts is Conservative MP for Witney and West Oxfordshire, former Transport Minister, and he's now Chairman of the Commons Defence Select Committee. Afua Hagan, broadcaster and journalist, and Geoff Norcott, a comedian who's the host of the What Most People Think podcast. Now, you're in the middle of a massive tour, aren't you?
Yeah. So we just finished the autumn winter tour. Then next year I'm out 40 plus dates. I'm out 4 days a week. Mansfield, Loughborough, Grimsby.
All the glamour places.
That's what it is. It's like football, isn't it? It's like, can you do it on a wet night in Grimsby?
Are you going to Chipping Norton? Because Robert might want to come.
Well, listen, everyone can get tickets. They're available from Live Nation, he said, just as shamelessly trying to shoehorn in the ticketing detail. I don't think I am in Chipping Norton, but I'm going to Stroud. I'm going.
You'd be welcome, Geoff.
Tring, which I don't believe is a place.
I did Tring the other day.
I just think Tring is a sound. I don't think that's actually a place. It sounds weird onomatopoeia, but yeah, if you go to Live Nation, there's lots of dates, and which makes my wife happy. You know, gets me out. Well, 3 days out of the house to 4 a week, I think that keeps things fresh.
And you're a great customer of Travelodges, aren't you?
Love a Travelodge.
Right, let's go to a text question from Alice in Tiverton. How much influence does Suella Braverman have over the Conservative Party right now? Geoff Norcott.
Well, as I said earlier, who would have thought, that when she stood up to give her resignation speech, it was trailed, wasn't it? Almost like an HBO prize fight. That it could be like, could it be a Geoffrey Howe moment? And it didn't really live up to that, did it? Even before she was sort of knocked off the top spot by Robert Jenrick, it did feel like someone somewhere had said to her, look, you can go in a bit, but if you ever want to be the leader of this party, you can't literally bring the government down. And I think the problem with Suella is that she had a couple of goes at being Home Secretary. She got sacked twice. She also, I think, when you're Home Secretary, she wasn't broad enough. She seemed to me to be a single-issue politician. All you ever hear her speak about, in some ways, is immigration. That is obviously, I acknowledge it's an important issue, that whether it's Labour or Tories, they're going to have to grip this. But that seems to be the thing that she is completely defined by. So I think that, she's if it's positioning, I think if she thinks that she could be the leader of the Conservatives, I don't think she's got the charisma or the intelligence. I just don't think the public would vote for somebody like that.
Afia?
Yeah, I agree with you, Geoff. I don't think she has much influence and hold over the Conservative Party at the moment, and I really hope that she doesn't, because if the party have any chance of getting back into power after the next general election, it cannot and should not and hopefully will not be under Suella Braverman. So I don't think she has much influence at the moment. I think it's definitely a case of she wishes she had much more power and influence than she does. And she tried, and she tried to wield that as Home Secretary. And I agree with you, Geoff. She seemed to be a one-issue politician. It was all about immigration. Lots of people have analysed it and looked at it and said, this is a case of, it's a kind of massive overcorrection. I'm not even sure why it was the one hill that she was prepared to die on. But at the moment, I would like to think she doesn't have much influence, doesn't have much say over the Conservative Party.
Immigration is like a really important issue, but it's not in the top
issue.
2, is it? I think it is, for most voters, it's the economy, it's healthcare, and then I think immigration.
But nor is Europe.
Cost of living crisis.
We then had the Brexit referendum, so that doesn't always compute, does it?
But this is the thing: is there's also an element of. The party at the time will try and, this is what you should be caring about. This is what that should be upsetting you. This is what should be keeping you up at night. They'll try and feed you the issues, I think. And I think that's kind of what was happening with immigration. I'm not denying it's a huge issue and it's something that people are concerned about. But right now, when I talk to people are way more concerned about cost of living crisis, way more concerned about the NHS, way more concerned about job security and things like that, rather than immigration. But we're being told that immigration should be the thing that we're concerned about. We're being told that othering people is a good thing. And so I think where we are now, Suella Braverman and her single-issue politics do not have much influence in the Conservative Party. And if the Conservative Party want to come back from the doldrums post-next general election, they'll make sure that it stays that way.
A text here from Vidal who says, wow, two politicians on opposite sides who are respectful to each other and believable. Good job, Ian. Nothing to do with me. I didn't book them. Corey did.
That's absolutely the last time that happened.
Steve Reed, from where you sit on the opposite benches, I mean, do you see that Suella Braverman has a big influence over the Conservative Party?
Well, how much influence does anyone have over the Conservative Party? They're like a circular firing squad. They're in some kind of death
spiral. Does she have more influence over the Conservative Party than Margaret Thatcher has over your party?
Good question.
I mean, the real problem here is this party, in chaos as it is, in a death spiral as it is, has immense influence over the country because they're still the government. And here we are talking about, psychodramas inside the governing party when they're supposed to be sorting out the problems with immigration, with the cost of living, with the health service. I can rarely remember a time when we've had so many crises facing this country, but we've got a government that seems determined not to govern. And it's why I think this crisis, of all the crises that we've had over the last few years, could be the one that finally triggers that general election much earlier in the new year than we think, because at some point Rishi Sunak is going to realise his ungovernable party ripping itself apart in front of the electorate for another year is going to end up with an even worse result for the Conservatives than if they go quickly.
Robert, I mean, Suella Braverman, I think she got 32 votes in the last leadership election, which was actually a lot more than I thought she might get, but she's clearly positioning herself. But, I mean, is she just appealing to the artist formerly known as the ERG?
So whoever you are and whatever position you're in and whatever your ambition is, if you want to have influence, then you do have to, Geoff's right, you've got to speak for more than on just one issue. There are a whole host of things out there that people really care about. Cost of living, of course, is massive amongst them, healthcare, education, business, growth, personal taxation, all of those issues. And there's also, looking at it from my own perspective, the thing I spend, my big parliamentary activity from the point of view of defence. Massively challenging times that we have as a country. I think we're facing some of the most challenging, dangerous, strategic times we've ever known in our lives. And people care about that as well. And those are the things you've got to be able to address. You've got to come up with a convincing argument and answers to all those complicated issues. You've got to be able to come up with a vision for what you want the country to be. If you had your chance, what kind of country do you want to see? That's the challenge that anybody who wants not just to be a leader, but to be an influential voice has to be. You can't just talk about one issue.
Robert, you seem like a conscientious and together guy. How does it feel watching this play out? It must be maddening because you seem like the opposite of a lot of the people that currently have the floor, and he's going to, in not too long, you're going to have to fight your seat. Do you resent their behaviour a bit? Sorry, I know I'm asking the question here.
Geoff, he'll be okay.
Oh yes, Witney. Sorry, Cameron's former seat. All right, fair enough. Well, you'll be all right.
And I'm not just saying this. What most MPs spend their time doing, it's certainly true of me, is I spend the vast majority of my time dealing with constituency issues, and I listen to people and I act on the things they tell me to do, and everything that I talk about, and even defence, that's a major national thing that I do, but I've got Bryce Norton in my constituency, the biggest RF base in the country. So that is also a constituency issue. So it's those things that I'm concentrating on the whole time. And I don't like, when you see massive, major scandals or crises that distract us from a lot of the stuff that we're doing. And Geoff's right, we have actually got a really good story to tell on a whole host of things, and we've got to be concentrating on that. And that's what I spend the entirety of my time
The truth is, sometimes parties run out of steam and they go a bit mad. It may even have happened to my party.
No.
Once upon a time, but it distracts you from doing the job that you need to be doing, particularly if you're in government, for the country. And I think having been there once in the past myself, sensible people in your party need to wrestle the party back from the headbangers and get it back to where the voters are. My experience is you'll have to be in opposition to do that, because you can't govern while you're also trying to rescue a political party. And I think we do need that election to come soon, because we can't go on with this rabble running out of country.
There is always
issues.
Sorry, Steve, I didn't mean to interrupt, but there's always a strata that you can see, which is the headline stuff. But there is a whole load of activity going on underneath that. And the government's made up of 100 or so people, and the junior ministers, and I've been one, I know what it's like. There might be a big ticket issue that's happening in the news that day, but I'm working away on something hard all the time. So that is all happening. So whilst I'm not saying these aren't big issues, they are, of course.
But when you can't agree on an immigration policy and it's that big, literally the immigration minister has resigned over their own government's immigration policy. The Home Secretary, the new Home Secretary, is having to negotiate a policy that he himself allegedly called batshit previously, and half the party's not going to accept it because it's too extreme one way, half because it's not moderate enough the other way. They're riven. What do? You can't govern. You can't just ignore it and say, well, we'll leave it to the civil servants. This needs political leadership, and there isn't any in a party that is fallen apart.
Well, I agree with the principle that you've got to have political leadership and you can't leave it to the civil service. That's not fair. That's not the way the system works. But I'm not making an excuse, but you do have to go back to the fact that this is a seriously tricky, thorny problem. You'd be kidding yourselves if you think if you guys are in power right now that you'd be in a better position. I mean, Labour pushed this under the carpet by just having an open door policy.
Well, do you know returns have fallen 70% since 2010 when the Conservatives came in? 70% reduction in returns.
You'd be having exactly the same problem, because what we are dealing
That's on your watch.
What we're dealing with is a global problem, Steve. This is not just us having this problem.
We do need
Every
to go,
country is having.
Interesting though this is, we need to go to the news because it's 8:32 on LBC. News headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
In the last hour, the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, has resigned just hours after the government's emergency Rwanda legislation was published. He says it didn't go far enough and stronger protections were needed to end the merry-go-round of legal challenges. Police in Las Vegas say they're responding to reports of an active shooter on a campus at the University of Nevada. People are being told to avoid the area of Beam Hall. And families whose loved ones have died in the pandemic have told LBC Boris Johnson's apology doesn't mean anything. The former Prime Minister said sorry at the COVID inquiry. LBC weather. Showers moving to the northeast overnight with lows of -2. Rain for many tomorrow morning, but feeling milder with a high of 12.
LBC.
Prices.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
If you've just tuned in, we have Steve Reid with us, Shadow Secretary for DEFRA, Shadow Secretary of State for DEFRA, and Labour MP for Croydon North, Robert Courts, Chairman of the Commons Defence Select Committee and MP for Witney and West Oxfordshire, Afua Hagan, broadcaster and journalist, and Geoff Norcott, who hosts the What Most People Think podcast and is appearing in a less than glamorous town near you over the course of the next few months. Right, let's go to another caller. It's Richard in Gateshead. Hello, Richard.
Good evening, Ian. My question to yourself in the panel is there any point on swearing on the oath if you're a compulsive liar like Boris Johnson? What I'm referring to, Ian, is his answers on his lost WhatsApp messages.
So this is referring to Boris Johnson's appearance at the COVID inquiry today, which I don't know how many of you saw any of it. I did watch some of it this morning, but I did find it a lot less interesting than I thought I might do, I have to say. And as with all the other witnesses, Boris Johnson swore the oath. And he was asked about the WhatsApp messages that were on his old phone, which haven't been found on his old phone. Now, I'm not a technological expert. I'm sure there must be some reason for that. Steve?
Well, the reason for it is he doesn't want those WhatsApp messages seen, isn't it? And it's not just his phone that isn't been handed in, nor has the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
Or Nicola Sturgeon's.
Well, that's right. Now, I think, the important thing underneath this is we need to learn lessons. So that means we need to find out what went on to learn them so we don't get a repeat if there's another situation like this. But also those people who did lose loved ones deserve to find out why they lost their loved ones and what went wrong. So there's a really important reason why this inquiry needs to be able to do its work and therefore needs to have access to all of the evidence. But even what we have seen has just exposed the level of chaos that there was in there. We've heard evidence from other people commenting about Johnson as well as Johnson himself. One day he was saying, let older people accept their fate. The next day we must protect older people, flipping from one side to the other, a trolley like Dominic Cummings described him. But it wasn't just him, Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time in the same government. And just looking at it from what we've learnt, they were out of their depth. They were in chaos. They were breaking the rules that they set. They were partying downstairs in the basement while having other people arrested for holding parties. Number 10 Downing Street is the address in the country that got the most fines for breaches of the rules that were set by Number 10 Downing Street. What an absolute chaos that they were in there.
But could you not... I put an argument forward that anybody who was in government at that time, there would have been a certain degree of chaos because we've never been through anything like that before. Clearly the preparations weren't there. And you say, well, he flipped from one position to another on consecutive days. Isn't that partly because the evidence kept changing over consecutive days? So do you not have any understanding?
No, I fully appreciate it was difficult, but it wasn't me that said those things. It was Dominic Cummings, who was his chief of staff. It was the chief scientific advisor who presumably was giving him scientific advice. But governments can't govern, and nor does the civil service know what to do if those at the top do not give some clarity and consistency about what needs to happen. And I'm afraid there was an absence of leadership from a man who was unfit for leadership.
Afua.
First of all, how many times have we used the word chaos when talking about this government in the past 40 minutes? That's my first point. Second point, this particular COVID inquiry, or this leg of it, of this 3-4 year inquiry that we're going to be in, it should absolutely be about accountability. How do we make sure that the mistakes we made are never made again? What were those mistakes? How do we make sure that if, God forbid, we're ever in this position again, we don't make those mistakes? But that's not what's happening. What's happening is it's just a bit like, wasn't me, no, wasn't me, point at that person over there, point at that person over there. It's like the not me gov inquiry. Like, there's nothing to do with me. It was that person over there.
And I think Baroness Hallett has kind of cottoned onto this, that the questions that are being asked of the different witnesses, a lot of it is about political tittle-tattle. It's not about learning lessons.
Well, this is the thing. So why are we even having this inquiry? Because it needs to be about learning lessons. No one wants to sit through this inquiry and hear about, this person did this and this person told on that person. What I want to know is, why were these people not doing a decent job? Now, obviously, nobody who's alive today has ever been through a pandemic before COVID-19. We don't know what to do. We were going into unknown unknowns. But this brings me into my second point. There is such a thing as standards in public office, right? And whether we have been through a pandemic or not, you still have to have certain standards in public office. And those standards were not making rules against having parties and then having parties downstairs yourself. Those standards were not having affairs when you should have been putting a protective ring around the elderly that you said you were doing, Matt Hancock, but you're actually putting a ring around somebody else. Standards in public life we're not there. Whether there's a pandemic or not, there's certain things that you should and should not be doing as people who work for us in the country. The government works for us. And that's what, Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock need to be reminded of, actually. You're working for me, not the other way around. And so this inquiry needs to get to the bottom of, first of all, how we even got into such a stage where so many mistakes were made. How do we stop those mistakes happening again? We had the worst possible government at the worst possible time.
Geoff?
It's a mixed bag, really. I think at that point, the caller made about whether or not Boris Johnson was lying. I mean, there's a weird moment when he gave his answer on those messages where I thought, well, he was lying. We all know he's lying. I think he knows he's lying. I think the geezer asking the questions knows he's lying. It was almost like, and it made me laugh. And I thought, well, it's not funny. Like he was leading the country at the time. So I think that I personally don't believe him on that. I thought it was an interesting day. It wasn't what I expected. I think we saw some genuine contrition in parts from him. So we saw some genuine emotion, not the sort of Matt Hancock type crocodile tear emotion, but there was a couple of times where his voice broke. There were a couple of facts which I'd sort of forgotten, where he said that, the word lockdown was only really first used in, I think it was on 7th of March, and or maybe the 3rd, but early March anyway, and we only went into lockdown on the 14th. I sort of remembered it as being ages that we didn't go into lockdown, whereas actually the delay could have been costly, but it wasn't actually a lot of days in terms of raw days numbers. I think the thing where he was a little bit deluded was about the dysfunctionality at the heart of his government. I think it was obvious to see. There was one moment where he said that, well, people, during government, people bang your door and ask for people to be sacked every day. That's just how government works. I was like, I'm not sure it is, mate. I think that there's probably been several governments before where that wasn't the issue, but I suppose the churn of Brexit and the tumultuous nature of politics during that time, that had become a standard way of operating. So like I say, I think that sometimes the line of questioning in this inquiry has been salacious, and if anyone's on a WhatsApp group with Hugo Keith, I'd suggest the breakaway one, because he loves a bit of tittle-tattle and a creative swear word. But I thought the testimony today was, it reminded me that Boris was less than fulsome with the truth sometimes, but also that it was a fast-moving and challenging situation, but also we had personalities at the heart of that government that perhaps weren't the best people to be there at that time.
I must admit, my takeaway from this morning was that he didn't seem to, even though I know he has been preparing for it, he didn't seem prepared in the way that Matt Hancock was. Yeah. Hancock had an answer for everything, whether you agreed with him or not.
Is that not just Matt Hancock?
Well, but it was actually quite an impressive performance, whereas Boris Johnson was stuttering and stumbling, and people say, oh, yes, but he does that all the time. Well, actually, he doesn't do that all the time.
And no jokes
and
as
when
well.
When he knows his subject, he can be quite impressive. But that wasn't the Boris Johnson we saw this morning. Robert?
So I think there's a couple of points here. I mean, firstly, yes, it's absolutely right. These are unprecedented circumstances, and so everyone's trying to figure out something that there literally is no playbook for. There is a pandemic preparedness plan, but it's for the wrong kind of disease, because it's for flu, not for a respiratory disease. And the real kicker with this, the thing that everyone's trying to figure out, is the fact that COVID is asymptomatic so that all the plans are gone, because they're all relying on the fact that people are symptomatic and start staying at home. So you've got people infecting each other before you know. That's the big issue that everyone's grappling with. But the second thing I think is quite important is that, with a WhatsApp group, you've got this sort of view into a stream of consciousness of what's going on at the time. This is quite unprecedented. And I think it's a bit unfair when you're dealing with people under immense pressure, dealing with something absolutely unprecedented, to view that as being an indication of their competence or otherwise. What they are doing is reacting to events, and they're often letting off steam. They are just figuring out what they're going to do in something. In some cases, they're stress testing ideas. If you were to go through the great moments of history and put WhatsApp groups in their place. You know, you read the Allenbrook diaries in 1940, for example, and imagine that was all WhatsApped. It'd look pretty different from how we look now, but we never got any of that. So I don't think we should be fixating on these WhatsApp groups, because I think it misses the points which I think are more important. So I don't think it's fair to judge people's competence or the suitability of the government or otherwise, given how unprecedented it was, and given all WhatsApp's doing is reporting what people are thinking at that time. But the reason why I feel strongly about this is that, yes, absolutely right. You know, Steve's right. You know, people who lost people are entitled to understand what happened, and we need to learn lessons from what went wrong and what went right, and look at what we'd do in the future. That's absolutely right. But I do think the inquiry is in danger of missing that, because of the political tittle-tattle that you're talking, of the salacious, of the gossip, of the stuff that you can look up someone swearing in a WhatsApp group. At the end of the day, those stuff, and sometimes people behave badly. People do that when they're under pressure. Sometimes they say things that don't look good, and they write things down that in the coolness of reflection doesn't look good. But there are real questions to be asked here about the wiring of government. There are real questions to be asked about whether there was proper red teaming and stress teaming about the decisions that were taken. You know, was it right for there not to have been that economic?
No, you were a minister at the time, but not in one of the departments concerned. Well, I suppose you were.
Later on. September.
Sorry?
September, so not at the beginning.
Right. But did you find that everything was dominated by COVID, and that sort of you were in transport?
Yeah, aviation and maritime, yeah.
And, I mean, that... Could you still get on with your work in a normal way, or did you feel this constant presence of sort of COVID activity that was really shutting down a lot of normal government?
Well, naturally, you're going to be spending a lot of time dealing with the big crisis, so I would be worrying about things like if we had a variant, for example, that was coming, what would that mean? And we had, you know, on the one hand, you're trying to keep freight coming into the country, but not open up unnecessary risk for whatever the variant might be, or for airlines, for example, you know, and similar issues with maritime. And I had security in my portfolio as well, so I was looking at that all the time as well. But all the time in the background, you're still doing what the civil service call business as usual work. So that's going on at the same time. But I really feel that people mustn't become so obsessed with the political tittle-tattle of what was said in a WhatsApp group and miss these important points about how the country's governed.
The important points are coming out as well, though, aren't they? You know, like we had the chief science officer saying the Prime Minister at the time would stand up and say he was following the science, but now we know he wasn't following the science. If there was some facts he found inconvenient for whatever reason or didn't fit with his prejudices, he would ignore them. And because of that, at that time, because it was a crisis, people may have died needlessly because of it. That's why we need this inquiry. It's not tittle-tattle.
Draw this to a close, I'm afraid. It's 8:48.
LBC. Availability. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Steve Reed, Robert Courts, Afua Hagan and Geoff Norcott with us taking your calls and questions. Text question here from Jessica in Ealing. Thames Water this week said that reviving its business will, quote, take time. Its profits are sliding. It has huge amounts of debt. It's supposed to offer a service to millions of people, yet is still pumping sewage into our waterways. Is it time we crack down on the greedy water bosses? Steve Reed, this is under your remit.
Yeah, easy, hard yes, absolutely. Because
how will you do that? How will you crack down on the so-called greedy water bosses?
Well, first of all, I mean, they're greedy because what they've been doing is profiting from pollution. They've been using their company's money not to invest it in fixing the broken pipes and making sure that this sewage isn't coming out into our rivers. They've been ignoring those facts to keep their profits high and then paying themselves. I think last year were £14 million worth of bonuses went to water bosses, rewarding themselves for failure when we had the highest level of illegal sewage discharges into our waterways, which are now stinking in many cases, and people are furious about that, particularly when they see their bills going up.
So what will you do about it?
So one thing, we need to put the water companies on special measures. We need to end the scandal where they monitor their own outflows because they cover it up. But importantly, I think we have to give the regulator the power to ban bonuses to water bosses who are overseeing law breaking in order to boost their profits and therefore give themselves bigger bonuses. It's a great big financial scam and it involves cover-ups, and it's the consumer that loses out when the polluter's getting away with it.
So that will be in your manifesto?
It will.
You see, this is great. This is why we have you on the programme, because you do actually commit to a few things, where so many of your colleagues say, we can't write our manifesto in advance.
I'll probably get in trouble for it after. But anyway, there you go, I've done it.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, he said their business is struggling. All they've got to do is find a way of making water popular, create a market for it, make people want water again, make it fashionable. I mean, I know I'm just the average thick person on the street, but how you can't make that profitable, I don't really understand. It's the thing that you need most and would die quickest without. So I think that is one of those areas where I think this would score well with both Tory and Labour votes. The kind of thing Steve's talking about would actually poll pretty well.
Fair?
I mean, absolutely. For any water company to have the highest level of illegal pollution in our water while still, £14 million bonuses, that's absolutely ridiculous. So we should be doing everything that we can to crack down on water companies, on water bosses, and clean up our water. It's a huge problem, a massive problem that needs to be dealt with. And Thames Water, instead of doing that, are making it worse. So, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
No-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, their record's not good enough. It's disgraceful. It has been for decades, and it's got to be better. Simple as that. The only thing that I think is important to draw attention to is that the people who've got a plan for fixing this is us. And
the 14 years.
Hang on. No, this has been going on for decades and decades, and no one's done anything. God. No one has ever done anything about this before, including you, Steve. You know it. The people who are doing this is us, and that is a plan that we've been doing over the course of the last 5 years or so. The reason
last year was the highest level of discharges after 13 years you've been in. So what you're doing isn't working, is it?
Because that just backs it up into people's houses.
Come on.
Yeah, but you can stop bonuses overnight for bosses that clearly aren't doing their job properly.
They're not doing their job properly, and it's not good enough, and they've got to do better. I'm not disputing that totally.
But would you support the regulator having the power Steve suggests to stop them having any bonuses?
I'll come to that in a second. The point I want to make is the reason that we now realise there's such a problem there is because of the monitoring that we've mandated, and the money that is going in to fix this is because we've required it to happen. That has never been addressed before. It is us who have revealed the problem, and we're fixing it. It has not been fixed yet, Steve. It is being fixed, and it's being fixed by us.
And the bonus issue?
As far as I'm concerned, there are any steps that make them clean up their act quicker, sooner rather than later, the better. I think it's a bit gimmicky.
Sadly, your Secretary of State ruled that out yesterday, but never mind.
Right, we can have a question about Nigel Farage or defence. I think we should have a defence one because Robert is chair of the Defence Select Committee. This is from Jarvis in Hull. How badly are we neglecting our military in this country? Now, the National Audit Office reported earlier this week that there is an estimated £17 billion black hole in the MOD's budget for weapons and equipment over the next 10 years. A US general previously has said that Britain is no longer a Tier 1 fighting force. How concerned are you, Robert?
So we have got the reason. That's a very good question, and that NAO report is clearly concerning. The reason for it, in a nutshell, is because of inflation and forex, foreign exchanges. Because a lot of our programs are kit that's bought from abroad, and if it's bought from the Americans, exchange rate changes, it becomes more expensive. In a nutshell, that's essentially the issue that's there. But look, we are going to have to spend more on defence. There's no two ways about it. Significantly more, because, as I said earlier, we are facing some of the most dangerous strategic times that we've seen as a country in our adult lifetime. So that is simply the way it is. However, you also got to have tighter spending controls on the MOD, because there is waste there, and it's pretty difficult to make the case for more money when so much of it is badly handled. We've just done a report on the way things are procured, and there's a lot more work there to be done.
This has been going on since the early 1980s, when Sir Peter Levine looked into defence procurement, and we're now in 2023 and nothing's changed.
I mean, it's a big thing. Things change. Things have got better. There's a lot of understanding, and this gets highly technical stuff. But things like, for example, the military learning to be better customers, so they're not constantly changing the spec of equipment as they're ordering it, which means it gets pushed to the right and it gets more expensive. All of that stuff is happening. But we've got to invest in a whole load of things. But the other thing I just want to make, it's not just about kit. It's not just about ships, aircraft. Above all, it's about people. And I've still got it running, but an inquiry into accommodation at the moment for military accommodation. We've got to look after the people who are looking after us, and we have to invest in the industrial base of the country, in the jobs that requires, and in making sure we have enough people of the right skills to serve the country.
20 seconds from each of the three of you, and then we can squeeze in the other questions. Steve?
Well, I agree with the point about procurement. There's an awful lot been wasted there. But I think we have to re-skill up our military. A lot of the threats we face are very different now. Cyber threats to the country. We've been fending off attempts already by some potentially hostile powers, Russia, China, to undermine some of our cyber security, hack into our systems. You can cripple a country that way, and I want to know we're secure.
Okay, Afua?
At the moment, with the different wars that are going on and conflicts around the world, I think it is a huge concern if our armed forces are not tier 1 anymore. And if there's something that we can do to make sure that we get there, then absolutely we should be doing that.
Geoff?
I'm going to go full Sun headline, more money for our brave boys and girls. I mean, genuinely, I'm glad to hear what Robert said about accommodation and personnel, because I had the privilege of gigging a lot for the armed forces. Yeah. And it's sort of cliche, it's easy to say, but once you work with these guys, there's something unique about the way they go about their business, so they need to have the best.
Right, a yes or no answer to the next question from Ashley in Maidstone. Ashley, hi.
Do you think Nigel should be in charge of Conservatives?
So should Nigel Farage be the next Tory leader? Yes or no, Robert Courts?
No.
No. Steve?
He's going to regret that when he's his leader. No.
Afua?
Absolutely not.
Geoff?
Nigel, it might not be you.
Very, very good. Right, our fun question from Keeley in Glasgow. With Taylor Swift being announced as Times Person of the Year, who would yours be? Afua?
Beyonce.
Why?
Because the Renaissance tour was incredible. It really was a renaissance in her career, and music generated billions to economies around the world. It was fabulous. I had sore knees for a week afterwards. That's why.
That took a turn. I was 30 yards away from Beyonce last week because she was outside our studios in Leicester Square. I didn't see her, but I know I was that near. Geoff?
Russ Abbott. I found an old photo. I met him when I was 8. My mum arranged me to meet him because he was my hero. And then he just had a note that said, "Be happy, Jeffrey." He wrote it on a photo for me. Such a nice guy. And during an era when you met celebrities at that age, the stories weren't always great, but he was a real gent. And let's be honest, without Basil and Bond, there'd have been no Austin Powers, and a forgotten British icon of comedy.
It's 2023, Geoff.
I'm not like these trendy comics that are going to say, Bill Carlin or George,
Took his advice, though. You're very happy.
Or Richard Pryor, Russ Abbott. That's what I'm going with.
Steve?
I'm going to say Fergal Sharkey. I mean, we had a conversation earlier about the state of our waterways, but Fergal's done more than any other individual, I think, to really raise awareness about this. And the reason he did it is he likes going fishing in the River Lee, and he saw the pollution coming through it, the fish dying, and he was angry. He didn't just complain about it. He got up there, he led a national campaign, and he's making a difference. So kudos to Fergal.
And has been a guest on this show, Robert.
So I'm going to pick the guy who never gets named and never gets thanked. I'm thinking about people like seafarers who are bringing goods to us throughout all all the weathers throughout the COVID crisis, people who bring deliveries to us.
I did say it was a fun question.
Robert Jenrick, then, go on.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much to all four of you, Steve Reed, Robert Courts, Afua Hagan and Geoff Norcott. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to return to the big news of the day, and that is the resignation of the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick. It's thrown the government into chaos, as if it wasn't there already. You had the Home Secretary outlining his plans for a new bill to limit asylum seekers coming to this country. And at the same time, the Immigration Minister resigns. It doesn't get much more chaotic than that, does it? But what could the long-term consequences of this be? A lot of people ring in saying, I want a general election and I want it now. Well, you might be getting your wish after this, it seems. 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.